Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Voices for Healthy Kids Summit Series. Thanks for joining us. This is our last session of the afternoon. This is Learning Lab Campaigns on the Leading Edge. I am Rena Singh, Director of Campaign Planning and Communications at Voices for Healthy Kids, and I'll be one of your moderators today. My other moderator is my colleague, Erica. Erica, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, folks. Erica Fung here. I'm a policy engagement manager with the Voices team, and I'm based in San Diego. Hope you're having a great day so far.
Thanks, Erica. We are going to do housekeeping, and then we'll talk a little bit about our panel, and then we will jump into the session. Yui, can you advance the slide for me, please? Okay. It looks like we are having some technical difficulties with the translation services, so if folks can keep an eye on the chat box, Yui will get us updated. We'll get that fixed quickly, so please bear with us. So just a reminder, today's meeting is being recorded. If there are additional tech issues besides the interpreter one that we're having now, please chat Andrea. You can chat her privately via the chat function, or you can email at voicesforhealthykids@heart.org. And then we will be taking questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to use the Q&A button or the chat function to post your questions, and we will pause in between each speaker for a question, and we'll make sure that we also have time at the end. All participants are muted for this session, so again, you'll have to use the Q&A or the chat function to ask your questions. And we will keep an eye on those and keep track of those. Go to the next one. We again have closed captioning and interpretive services. To access live closed captioning, please go to captionedtext.com, and you can use the confirmation number 4599591. And Yui also just posted that in the chat box if you need that link or that passcode again. And again, if you have any questions or any issues, please contact Andrea using the chat function or voicesforhealthykids@heart.org. And then finally, as we've been doing all day, if you've been with us, there will be an evaluation at the end. Please make sure you fill that out. We take your feedback very seriously, and it helps us plan future summits and future training sessions. So we really appreciate the time that you'll take to fill that out. So as I said, again, welcome. Thanks for joining us for our Learning Lab. We are really excited about this session. During this panel, you will learn from 3 campaigns who will share case studies of their own experiences leading with equity and working to integrate campaign elements like grassroots organizing, media advocacy, and coalition building and other elements to move the needle forward to make each day healthier for all children. So with that, we are going to get started. I'm going to hand it over to Erica to introduce our first panelists.
Thanks so much, Rena. Everybody, you're in for a real treat today. We have some really awesome campaigns that are really going to provide some great tips when it comes to grassroots organizing. And the first is Together Louisiana. We're joined today by Baggard, who's the lead organizer, and Carrie Vogelsang, who's the health equity organizer. Together Louisiana is a statewide network of more than 250 religious congregations and civic organizations that's all across Louisiana. And it really is just so large in scope. It represents more than 200,000 people. It's one of the largest grassroots organizations in the history of Louisiana and has been doing some fantastic work. They're going to discuss their ongoing campaign related to health equity funding and their grassroots strategies. So if I can hand it over. Broderick and Carrie.
Thank you so much. My name is Broderick Baggard. I joined on Carrie's link, I just realized, but I have learned to change my name. If I've learned nothing through COVID-19, it's how to change my name on Zoom. Thank you guys for doing this. I think maybe the most important thing that we've learned in this weird period is that the more you can create deliberative spaces where people can reflect together, the more effective we can be. Appreciate the one that you guys have created here. I am going to hand this off to Carrie in just a minute, but to frame what we want to kind of do and say, we are an organizing network and have, I think, a premise, which is that a lot of the problems that are really intractable become less intractable when people have power, that the solutions the lack of solutions is not just a matter of a lack of technical knowledge or know-how or just understanding. It's often that there are interests that are kind of vested with the messy, messed up way things are, you know, or at least perceive themselves to be that way. And so changing kind of even small things means those interests not prevailing. And that's kind of our tradition. And it's almost like everything has a health equity aspect to it. But for the first time in the last 6 months or so, through this grant opportunity and voices, we said, yeah, it's not enough just to kind of have health equity implications. Let's like specifically have somebody who's going to work on health equity per se, who's come from a health equity background, and kind of marry those two, the kind of organizing tradition and how to really drive toward policy outcomes. So Carrie's going to share a little bit about our work in the Louisiana-Mississippi Delta, in particular in East Carroll Parish, which is one of the poorest places of the country. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about St. John the Baptist Parish, which is kind of a strategy that's emerging. Go ahead, Carrie.
Thanks, Broderick. And yes, I'm going to focus in on just one of the areas of the state that we're working in. It's the Delta region, which, if you're not familiar with Louisiana, it's the northern part that's right along the Mississippi River. And it's historically one of the poorest parts of the state, as Broderick mentioned, but also in the county. And I became engaged with this work, specifically being brought on to focus on health equity. At the end of July, I started working with a group which is called Delta Interfaith, which is, they've been working together for a few years now, doing organizing work per what Broderick had discussed as far as what the organization is focused on, the grassroots community organizing. Through the COVID response grant, I was able to engage with them in conversations specifically around health needs. And they brought it up before I did, just discussing about their testing, the lack of testing in their area, which I was able to connect them to through my relationships with the Department of Health, so that they could communicate directly with the state agency that is leading the COVID response effort across the state. They were able to then lead their own conversation with the Department of Health, the Office of Public Health, the Office of Community Partnerships, who also brought in their regional people, and the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Response. So this group was able to engage and really advocate for themselves about what was missing in terms of being able to get tested at the community level. The agencies were able to tell them, yes, we haven't been back since May to do any community testing. And so they were able to then get a testing site set up for testing in September. It was very exciting to see them go through this process, because they were able to really advocate for themselves with these different partners in the state, and also get connected to the largest health hospital system to set up this testing site and really reveal where the gaps were in terms of why they're not getting access. They're not able to provide the services easily. They have to really focus on just certain parts of a rural community, which then limits who in the towns that they do set up with even have access. So in East Carroll and Madison parishes, they share the rankings in 64 and 63, which out of 64 parishes in Louisiana. They're primarily 60 to 70% African American and highly agriculture focused. So it really showed the different partners in the state where they were missing the mark, and hearing it directly from the community themselves. So we were able to be just an initial conduit to let them take over with the relationship building themselves. So they were also able to debrief after the testing And from there, well, before I go there, they were able to move the needle from the COVID testing from 8 people the first time, since there was no community involvement when they went into the community the first time, to 42, which they said was very good based on where we're at in the COVID testing right now, where people are more fatigued and not as willing to go get tested. They really were impressed with the community. They want to come back and want to build that relationship with the community there. And the community leaders within Delta Interfaith were also able to advocate for mobile breast cancer screenings, so that they will now have access to breast cancer screenings starting with Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So it's really shown that COVID, we talk about COVID being a catalyst to look at, shining a light on these inequities. And that is an opportunity to address longstanding issues. And it really was in this case where the community themselves is able to now go down this road beyond COVID and look at some of these other health outcomes and lack of access to care, and really start working with these health partners in the state to look at what more can be done to address the inequities that they're facing. So I think that the power that they built before COVID really was in place to do that advocate for themselves, and it's going to keep building now, where they're going to understand that this isn't about these transactional testing day or screening days, but how there can be more of a presence. And I think that that's going to be the next steps in terms of the relationship building that's ahead. So I want to now go from there to take it over to Broderick, who's going to talk about another region of the state where it goes beyond just addressing the inequities in the specific health outcomes, but more broadly across the parish through an opportunity with tax revenue that's coming back to the parish.
In a former life, I thought I was going to be an academic and was kind of going that way, and then decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to organize. And one of my professors, who was kind of a mentor, he said, why bother? You're just splitting up the peanuts in community organizing and advocacy. The real question is, how many peanuts are there? And it has always stuck with me, because a lot of the questions are about kind of, distribution of these very limited amounts of public goods. And a fight that we've gotten into over the last several years in Louisiana, which, by the way, is one of the richest states in the United States when you talk about the wealth production that happens there, has kind of gotten into this question of how many peanuts there are. There's an element of this that actually the Delta is fighting. Amazing things happen. A Thai petrochemical plant that had its property off the tax rolls through these tax exemptions, even though it laid everybody off and shut the plant down, was going to get its property evaluation reduced from 28 million down to 3 million. But Delta Interfaith stood up and said, no, we're not going to let that happen, and they won it. There's something going on in a place called St. John the Baptist Parish that's one of the most exciting things that I've experienced. And I think we have some slides. And this is going to be one sentence for each of these. And if there's any animation, just kind of keep going through it. I might have left some in there. St. John the Baptist got hit very hard by COVID. It was one of the places with the highest deaths per capita in the United States. It's about halfway between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, right in the area they call Cancer Alley. And they call it that because it's just loaded with petrochemical facilities and a lot of the pollution implications of that. St. John the Baptist has a cancer risk that's 50 times the national average. Here's the national map, and it'll zero in now. And that's St. John the Baptist Parish. It's kind of virtually all red in terms of its cancer risk. It's 58% black as a parish as a whole, but the part that's right along the kind of petrochemical corridor is 92% black. That's not a real slide. Actually, I think I sent the wrong one. So let me. I did. I sent the wrong presentation. Is it okay to share? Do you let people share? If not, then we can just turn it off and I can talk.
Yep. I can go ahead and stop sharing and you can share your screen.
Okay, perfect. So I think this is where we were. So last year about this time, folks started looking at the question of the peanuts, in particular, the tax exemptions that had been given to the facilities that had caused a lot of that pollution. One of the largest refineries in the country is there, Marathon Oil, which is a $3.5 billion facility. It has had, of that $3.5 billion, $2.3 billion off the tax rolls, exempt, not paying property taxes, not to schools, not to public health units, not to hospitals. How much is that? That's more property exempted than every single business in the entire state of Texas put together. This one facility has gotten 127 exemptions over the last 18 years, 20 years, largely because of what we call the grandmother of all preemption. The state has controlled these exemptions and gave them away like hotcakes until we won an executive order reforming it. And this was the first exemption that went to the local level, and the local residents organized and did civic academies and got those exemptions defeated for the first time, which is now no big deal. They're just going to pay their taxes like everybody else. But about a month ago, the property tax rolls came out, and St. John the Baptist's total property tax revenue is going to go from $57 to $100 million this year in December. Which is a 70% increase in 1 year in annual repeating revenue. So the community has decided to try to really make this a kind of game changer of what can happen when a community drives decision makers. And there's such an extraordinary opportunity to have, I won't say unlimited, but I would say maybe unimaginable or unimagined resources to say what are the most meaningful interventions that could happen. So we've begun talking about a project called Reimagine St. John that is going to be citizen-led to then create a vision for what then the taxing bodies would do with this revenue, under the feeling that if we just left it to them, they're going to mess it up. I mean, they're going to give it away and just tax cuts or do more exempt, or just do it in ways that are a little bit here for this fiefdom, a little bit here for that one. But if we can engage all of the institutions, we organize institutions of a community, the religious congregations, civic organizations, neighborhood groups, random individuals, and have a vision that really reflects, on the one hand, what the lived experience of people who have been on the wrong side of oppression for a long time, and at the same time, to engage some of the best thinking about what a transformative health equity agenda could look like. It's a time where the money will be there to do those things. So we think it could help to set a vision for the rest of the state of what it could do if it actually started making use of its resources instead of giving them away to foreign corporations that don't need them. So that's the end of our presentation, and I don't know if we do Q&A, but
Thank you so much, Broderick and Carrie. Really appreciate that overview of Delta Interfaith and also St. John the Baptist. Just amazing work that you're doing. We have time for one question, perhaps, in the chat box. We will have a general Q&A session at the very end, too. But we wanted to give folks, if you're hot on the edge of your seat, ready to ask a question, please type one in now and we'll get it answered. Oh, I see a hand raised behind Broderick.
this is Julian.
Hi, Julian.
Left is right, right is left.
Okay, gang. Well, it seems like there's not a question in the chat box, so we can wait for that till the end. I'm going to hand it over to Rena.
Thanks, Erica, and thanks, Carrie and Broderick. That was great. I have the pleasure of introducing Ida Escamani, who is from Florida and the statewide alignment group there. She's the public affairs director for a coalition of progressive organizations. And the members include Organized Florida, New Florida Majority, and the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and she's the founder of the statewide Defenders of Local Democracy table. Ida is going to talk to us about how she has built an amazing multi-issue coalition that works on preemption in Florida. So Ida, we will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Such an awesome presentation from our friends in Louisiana. Thank you for all that you do. My name is Ida Escamani. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a fast talker, so I'm going to slow down for our interpreters. And it's good to be here to talk about our work in Florida to combat the abuse of preemption. We can go to the next slide. Awesome. So the table we have formed, we call ourselves the Defenders of Local Democracy. And I want to kind of go over just the past couple years, our founding, how we started, our work these past 2 legislative sessions, our work during this pandemic, and things that we are preparing for 2021. And doing so, I'll go into a little bit of some of the dynamics in Florida as well. We can go to the next slide. So, you know, a classic saying, if you build it, they will come. So I took on this role as essentially a lobbyist for a statewide coalition of organizations focused on racial and economic justice. And one of the issues that was front of mind for us was combating preemption in the legislature. Organized Florida, one of the groups that I represent, in 2013, the state preempted a local ordinance we got passed in Orange County, which is where Orlando and Central Florida, Walt Disney World is located. We had got on the local ballot a local earned sick time initiative. Before that initiative went to the ballot, we had secured enough petitions, it's going to go on the ballot. Before that vote, the legislature convened and they preempted the entire state from passing any earned sick time. It was a complete reaction to a local ordinance. We've seen this, you know, movie before. So preemption is critical to particularly the groups that I represent, because we've seen firsthand how our efforts at the local level have been completely stripped away by a corporate interest. It was Walt Disney World that led the fight against us at the local level and essentially wrote the preemption bill at the state level. And so I came into this role knowing that preemption was top of mind for us among many issues. And then came House Bill 3, essentially this kind of nuclear preemption bill would preempt everything. Every local regulation on the books would be preempted if House Bill 3 were to pass. And so we had this task within my world of stopping this bill. But what we had seen across the country on preemption bills were, you know, this issue of carve-outs, right? And typically when we carve out certain communities, the ones who are wealthy are the ones that are carved out, and the folks that are left behind are typically the working poor, Black and brown folks, immigrants. They're the ones left in the bill because they don't have the same donor capacity to get themselves out of a bill, right? So we knew that we had to build something to create a collective force against House Bill 3, and to at least have partners talking to each other in the process. So at least if there is a difference of strategy to stop a bill, at least we're giving each other a heads up about it, and we're not, you know, finding ourselves divided in these fights, because ultimately we all lose when we're divided. And so it was in 2019, and it was myself actually talking with a colleague at Equality Florida, the state's LGBTQ civil rights organization, and we sort of came to this consensus that the best way to stop preemption bills is to work together to do so. The best way we can serve our members and our mission is to come at these preemption bills with a broad narrative, a broad message around the abuse of preemption, and the harm it'll cause, whether intentional or unintentional consequences. And the best way to do that is together, not separately. So it was myself and a peer at Equality Florida who started this table, and from there we have continued to grow. We can go to the next slide. So some stuff around Florida, right? So in Florida, stopping bad things from happening is a victory. We have a Republican trifecta, very conservative, have been abusing preemption for the past decade or so. Preemption is one of those key issues that unites diverse stakeholders. It's an issue that impacts a lot of partners. It's one of the few issues that brings together a lot of different stakeholders that typically you would not find working together. And again, as I noted, when those who are opposed to the abuse of preemption, when we're divided and not coordinated, corporate interests win, and our communities lose. And that was essentially the agreement we came to form this table. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but but being in coalition, you know, coalition is like a plant. You've got to nurture it. You got to sometimes move it in different places to make sure it has the right sunlight. You have to take care of it. And so we, having all these different groups, which I'll go into in a second around our members, we had to kind of form a collective kind of purpose, a mission statement. And so we work very closely with the Local Solution Support Center, an awesome national partner. We also have the pleasure of being a grantee of the American Heart Association. And so, you know, we defined a common mission statement that links up all these different groups who typically have very different missions, was a challenge. So, and I'm a fan of more concise statements, but ultimately we came up with like 3 paragraphs to define ourselves, and this is one of them. But the basis of this is, you know, the abuse of preemption must be stopped, and when it's lowering the standards, lowering the standards at the local level, that we have to collectively oppose it. And so this is sort of the statement that keeps us together in moments of, you know, crisis we can refer back to. We can go to the next slide. Awesome. So the question I'm sure folks are wondering, who is part of this thing? So we have, we're growing. We have 40 different organizations. You know, kind of our only threshold is of course, preemption, stopping the abuse of preemption should be an organizational priority. B, of course, you agree to our general kind of loose mission, you know, essay around why we do what we do and why we're here. And then 3, you know, you need to have some sort of presence in the state legislature. A lot of organizations do work at the local level, and we also have separate local tables that focus on passing local policy. This is not that table. This table is all about combating preemption at the state level. And so we've got a whole bunch of different partners, economic and racial justice groups, organized labor, public health, gun safety, immigrant rights, civics and civil rights, the environmental organizations, broadband advocates, LGBTQ, reproductive rights, animal advocacy groups, some national partners, and we're also super excited to have just officially brought on the League of Cities. We liaison a lot with the Association of Counties, but we're trying to get them to bring someone kind of as a point person to be in our meetings and be a part of our work. But this is the only kind of expansive coalition like this that operates in the legislature. I work on a lot of different issues. I work in immigration and criminal justice, in the environment, and the intersections that this table represents, there's no other space like it. And it's because preemption just has that type of impact on all of us. And so it's been a really beautiful space. It's a difficult space to cultivate sometimes because, you know, you got to get the organized labor to sort of care about the environmental issues, and you got to get the LGBTQ groups to care about, you know, the trees and the organized labor. And so, but because we all come from these different spaces with this common goal, we're actually very effective because we're very strategic about how we do our work. We can go to the next slide. So how do we do this, right? We set our mission, we convene weekly during legislative session, we convene bi-weekly out of legislative session, and we coordinate our efforts. So together we draft and file legislation, we lobby and leverage relationships. That's super important in the sense of some of us have really close ties with different committee chairs. Some of us are better with Democrats and Republicans. Some of us are really good with big business, right? Depending on your organization, we all have these different tactical things we can bring to the table. And when we work collectively, we kind of deploy everybody to do what they do best. And ultimately, again, it's to serve our members and our individual issues, but we just come to this agreement that we are better at stopping these bad bills or working collectively on them. So we organize a presence in committee hearings, we mobilize lobby days, we align our communications and our media engagement. We have really been grateful for resources to do polling. That's been really helpful in targeting certain committees and lawmakers. Again, we're strategic and intentional about how we build our campaigns. And then we also provide for the greater group, particularly from some of our awesome national partners, legal analysis, best messaging guidance, best practices. And we, of course, coordinate the space, which in itself is, quite a lift. Next slide. And so quick overview, I'm not going to go through all of this, but basically we've been, very successful, which is in Florida, hard to even believe, honestly, because it's such a difficult place to do this work. But there was actually a moment after the 2019 legislative session where the committee chair of the committee that often hears preemption bills said to a colleague of mine, wow, those preemption folks are a lot more organized this year. And so it just, became very clear that they weren't used to us having such a force, and it's not always clearly front-facing unified. We don't typically come up saying, we are the defenders of local democracy. We do a lot of our coordination behind the scenes, and then what we put out in the public is more strategic, right? So oftentimes, our opponents in big business don't even know how closely we're working together, and in a lot of ways that gives us a lot of strength. But then other moments, we're rolling out joint press releases, we're putting out memos together, so it really is a case by case based on the fight. This last session, they actually formed a committee just on local government as a result of how strong we were growing, called the House Local Administration Committee, and we were there every meeting. We also launched a repealer campaign. Basically, we called it the Repeal-a-thon, where we packaged a bunch of preemption repealer bills to really demonstrate all the different ways that local government's hands are tied and that community is impacted. And that included, things from the environment, like the plastic bag and styrofoam preemption, to earned sick time, to rent control, just to demonstrate that all these things are already preempted and it's causing direct harm to our communities. This last session, we were able to stop the majority and the most dangerous of the 40+ preemption bills, and doing so secured bipartisan support for home rule. And I listed some of those bills that I'm more than happy to go in the weeds on another day. You can go to the next slide. Awesome. So legislative session ended for us in March. We literally went right into end of session, into COVID and rapid response. Florida, as I'm sure no one is surprised by, and other southern states can relate, we're very late to responding to COVID. And at this point, the governor has pretended like it doesn't exist. And so we are just in constant crisis right now, and disproportionately working class folks and Black and brown communities are impacted. So this whole summer, we've been doing a lot of work on educating folks on the impact of preemption. Almost every single repealer bill that we had filed, bills that would have repealed current preemptions and give local governments that authority, would have helped people during COVID, from housing, from earned sick time, even smoking, local smoking bans, because we know COVID is a respiratory disease, right? Gun control, because we've seen increase of homicides and suicide. So all these intersections, broadband, all these intersections, if we had had local control, local governments would have been able to serve their communities better. And most importantly, community would have been able to pass these laws that we know we need. So we worked with national partners throughout this summer to do a campaign really about the corporate influence and how corporations are why we don't have these things. And that is so important. It's beyond partisanship. It's all about corporate influence. And so just we sent a letter to the governor with a long list of repealers, essentially asking him to use his executive authority to temporarily suspend preemptions to allow local governments to act best for their communities. That letter was, as you can imagine, ignored, but we've gained a lot of support in the community, in various voter education events throughout the summer, in different candidate forums, things like that. And just with the media, we've been elevating so many of our efforts in the media and in things that sort of the general public didn't realize was preempted as well. So, what we know is the more people learn about the abuse of preemption, they oppose it. Preemption has been this really sneaky tool that lawmakers have been able to use at the bequest of corporations to deregulate and make more profits. So the more we do to educate folks on it, the less they're able to use that power. And we've seen that these past 2 legislative sessions as well. Next slide. I think I'm almost done. Yeah. So we are already preparing for the 2021 legislative session. And it's very exhausting because it's one thing after another here in Florida, but we're excited about what we're doing. And so double downing on a lot of our efforts, but also expanding our coalition. We're going to roll out a big omnibus local democracy bill and just continue to really try to make this a nonpartisan issue. Working with the League of Cities, we're really excited to build more deeper relationships with Republican local officials, particularly in North Florida and areas that are traditionally more conservative. But when it comes to home rule and the general idea that one size does not fit all, and that what works in Miami won't work in the Panhandle and vice versa, we're hoping to gain more partnership with some more unlikely allies that'll really help to just keep shifting the narrative in the legislature. We can do next slide. Awesome, thank you. And the one thing I'll say, the other tactic we've done is really leveraging kind of follow the money, because so often you can connect the dots in the sense of this corporate influence has donated to this candidate, and now they're the chair of this committee and they're hearing this preemption bill. And so when we've been able to unveil some of those connections, that's also helped to just kind of tank some of these bills, which again, in Florida right now, we have a long kind of vision in our heads too, but a lot of it is the short term of just mitigating harm in the legislature. And that's our work. Thanks, folks. Appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Ida. We are going to hold questions till the end. We're collecting them, and so we'll have time at the end, but I'm going to kick it over to Erica to introduce our friends from Missouri.
Thanks so much, Rena. Our next presenters are Maura Gray. She's Missouri's Government Relations Director with the American Heart Association, and she's joined by Raina Spencer, who's the Director of Government and Community Relations over at Beyond Housing. Beyond Housing is a comprehensive community development organization that offers holistic resources and support, from housing to health to education and economic development. Maura and Rena will be discussing media advocacy tactics from their successful Medicaid Expansion campaign and talk about community engagement. So ladies, turning it over to you.
Thanks, Erica. And thanks, Ida. Maybe we should definitely talk offline because I think we're considering a preemption coalition here in Missouri too. But we're really excited to talk about Medicaid today. So if you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. So most of you should be familiar with the American Heart Association. One of our top priorities is health equity, and Medicaid expansion falls under that umbrella, essentially. So we were a really active part of this campaign. And on August 4th, we voted to pass Medicaid expansion and become the 38th or 39th, if you count DC, state to pass this issue. And this has been a pretty contentious issue for a little while because the legislature has refused to take it up. So this had to be basically an all hands on deck effort. And at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that I noted that one of our main goals of our Medicaid expansion campaign was to work as a team. And I want to highlight the word team there because we had, we had all the hospitals working with us. We had the Missouri Chamber working with us, and of course the national organizations like the American Heart Association, and also local organizations like Beyond Housing, who you're going to hear from here in a little bit. But yes, this was a cohesive effort, and it had to be because we faced 2 major hurdles during this campaign. One was that this wasn't supposed to come up until the general election on November 3rd. And our governor had decided that it was going to be placed on the August 4th ballot. And he did that in about, I think it was like the end of May. And so we all kind of had to rush to get on the same page and get all of our ducks in a row and figure out what our messaging was going to be and how we were going to get this message out to voters. But then the second piece was, there's been all of this press around mail-in ballots. And it was kind of the same thing in Missouri too. And the legislature just recently passed this past session where we could do mail-in ballots. But in Missouri, you have 3 options. You can do in person, you can do a mail-in ballot, but you can also do an absentee ballot. And so there was all of this confusion around it because absentee ballots also get mailed in, but they have exemptions for notaries, whereas all of our mail-in ballots have to be notarized. So not only did we have to have cohesive messaging around what Medicaid expansion was, but also how voters could vote on the amendment itself. So that's why it had to be such a collective effort. So if you want to go to the next slide. So speaking of coalition work, and I loved Ida's example of it being kind of like a plant. So the list of groups that you see in front of you are just kind of like our big patient advocacy partners that we typically work with. On the state level, you know, I lobby for the Heart Association to state lawmakers, and I work really, really closely with the American Cancer Society and the American Lung Association, and also to the MS Society. So we got together and we put this group together, and I was able to lead the coalition, and we immediately started putting weekly calls together where we could share our social media content, we could share all of our action alerts out to our network, so we all had the same messaging and all of the same deadlines. We also had put together a media tracking document so that we could track what was being said in the press as well. But as we were having all of these weekly calls and everything, we were notified through voices, hey, there's this local organization who's doing some local work on Medicaid expansion in St. Louis area, in particular, a really high impact area. And so at that point, I had reached out to Raina to have her join in on these coalition calls and kind of tell us what they were doing. And up until this point, most of our media advocacy work was done all digital. Obviously, we were working on this issue right in the height of the pandemic. We're still in a pandemic, but it was kind of earlier on. And so, like I said, we were doing all of our work digitally, and they were actually had the opportunity to do boots on the ground work. And so we were able to send her some of our stuff that we had on hand for their pop-up events, and coordinate with her team to kind of let her know what platforms we were using. We had put together a texting program, and we were also using Tapjoy, which is kind of like a new platform through apps on your phone to get the message out. And so we were also able to connect her team with the campaign and kind of have an all hands on deck effort. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to Raina and let her show you all of the cool things that they did that were able to come out of that campaign.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Raina Spencer, and as you heard earlier, I'm the Director of Community and Government Relations for Beyond Housing. And so before we get started, I kind of want to give you guys some context on 24-1. Our 24-1 partnership and initiative is nationally recognized as the Robert Willard Johnson Foundation for Health awardee, and so we have been very intentional about leveraging our network and making an impact, no matter if it's housing, education, public policy, and so forth. So with that, I'll give you guys an intro video to who we are and what we do.
This isn't the same old story. This is a new one. Something special.
We're just having some slight technical difficulties. There we go.
This isn't the same old story. This is a new one. Something special is happening here in the 24-1 community, the 24 cities in the Normandy School District in North St. Louis County. You can see it and feel it. A sense of optimism and enthusiasm is in the air. Pagedale has its first grocery store in 40 years, along with a new multiplex cinema, a coffee house and cafe, a retirement center, a bank, a financial center providing fair loans, and a new healthcare facility. In Wellston, there's a beautiful new park where families meet and play. Throughout the community, cities have joined forces to provide better services for their citizens. Schools and students everywhere are improving, and the Missouri Board of Education has taken notice. 1,700 families now have college savings plans. Our youngest residents are a lot healthier. More families everywhere are living in high quality, affordable homes. Older homes are being repaired. Brand new homes are being built. More families are becoming homeowners for the first time. Make no mistake, things are changing for the better. So if you're looking for a success story and real results that you can get behind, then look no further than right here in the 24/1 community.
So the 24/1 community stands for 24 communities that act as one. In St. Louis County, there are 88 different municipalities, and if you're familiar with how local government works, that's probably not the ideal situation.
To everyone who's hungry for real,
I can go ahead and go on from here. Not the most ideal situation. And so every community has its own culture, has its own behavior. And so what Beyond Housing has endeavored to do is bring everyone together and be focused, right? And so we have an older population, and when we did our market analysis, we saw that we have in certain areas a much older population versus, you know, as we get closer to the city, we have a younger population. But what we did find is there is a substantial amount of people who lacked health insurance. And so Medicaid expansion obviously would benefit our particular community. And so what we did was, again, leveraging those resources, leveraging our network. Plus, we were addressing the voter education, the voter awareness, and about the balance in a pandemic, as well as census. We lost a whole district with our last census count. So, you know, this stuff is important because it directly impacts an aging community, whether it's population or whether it's infrastructure. So with that, using our boots on the ground with our 24/1 community coalition, with our boots on the ground 24/1 municipal partnership, that means that we actually have, I work monthly with 24 mayors on a monthly basis, talking about policy, efficiency, governance, best practices. And bringing Medicaid expansion, census outreach, and voter education is not is a priority for these particular municipalities. So what you're looking at, Beyond Housing and our CEO, Christopher Krameyer, had the intuition to develop position us as a convener, as a facilitator. And our 241.com kind of expresses all the information, all the resources, and brings into focus the priorities that are necessary, that's impacting our community. So this is our 24/1 from the residents' perspective. Everything that we work on, small business, census, why should we count? Keep going. You'll see things around voter education, the community vision. There's our vote equals voice. Can you tap on the vote equals voice? And again, realizing that our population is diverse depending on which community you're in. So we had to make sure we tapped into the young folks, right? So we did a mural that stretched on a better part of one community block that says vote equals voice. And we've been able to leverage that. You know, this is an expression of the community, a painting by the community, for the community. And in August 4th, we needed every vote to pass Medicaid expansion. We turned up and turned out in the 24/1. The voter outreach, the voter turnout was elevated. Now, was it substantial? No, but progress is progress, especially in a local election. And we needed those votes to pass Medicaid expansion. So that's our vote equals voice, trying to touch the young folks. And then from there, we kind of again leveraged along with Mora and American Heart Association, and with our grant monies that we were able to acquire, we were able to put up billboards. You saw the billboard in the first slide. The social media campaigns, the pop-ups. We did pop-ups 2 to 3 times a week. That meant leveraging those events that were already going, those drive-through distributions. Any type of awareness that of 23 communities, you can imagine there's something going on all the time, but being committed to being the boots on the ground, leveraging our billboards, our flyers, our radio communication, and making sure that our messaging was aligned. So essentially, we just got sick of, people got sick of us because we were everywhere, no matter where you turned. We did some of our own artwork depending on the way or whichever we kind of targeted area. We changed the artwork up. We changed up some of the language. What's more important to the west side of our footprint might not be as important to the east side of our footprint. So with that, you know, just kind of understanding your audience, meeting them where they're at, we provided the value of Medicaid expansion, dispelled some mistruths about Medicaid expansion, and made sure that it was continuous and committed all the way through. We only had 6 weeks to really punch it, and we did. That's what I have.
Well, thank you so much, Rena. Thank you, Maura. That was so inspiring, and seeing those images of just the murals and the street painting. I know you definitely gave me some ideas, and I hope you gave some of our team ideas too. I think we have a couple of moments for a few questions. We had a few that came in the chat box, some that got answered directly. One that made me chuckle that came in is from my friend Amanda, who is in Montana, and her question was, how do you make sure you're not seen as the lefty coalition? And I think that that's a good question for folks that are working in more conservative areas. Could someone take that? One of our panelists?
Well, for me, for Medicaid expansion, you know, again, speaking in the language that's necessary for the audience, right? Medicaid expansion wasn't a handout for us. As a matter of fact, it didn't touch our budget, right? It was dispelling those mistruths and getting people to understand, if you don't expand Medicaid expansion, we're going to pay for it one way or the other. Which way do you want to pay for it? Having people that didn't have access to medical care, so they're using the emergency room as their medical care, which is driving up the cost for medical expenses, right? So aligning that language that makes sense for the audience. At the end of the day, you know, all you can do is fight for the people who need the support, and make sure you're speaking the language that makes sense for everybody to move it forward. That's my perspective.
Yeah, I would just piggyback off of what she said. I think from AHA's perspective, what we constantly reminded everyone in terms of Medicaid expansion was the fact that Medicaid is health insurance. And we're a science-based organization, and we just kind of took it from that perspective. I understand the question, you know, it is kind of hard sometimes, but for AHA, you know, we are science-based, and this doesn't have anything to do with politics. Unfortunately, Medicaid gets politicized all the time, but yeah, just reminding people that it was Medicaid is health insurance.
We had a question for our friends in Louisiana. How are public officials involved in the citizen process that you were describing? So what's the relation between the public officials and the citizen-led process? Where do they come in? I don't know, Broderick or Carrie.
Yeah, I think I'll take that one. I mean, in St. John, frankly, it's been a little bit different from our ordinary model, which is to organize for 3 years or so in a place before we start taking on issues. So that kind of when you emerge, you know, you're strong enough to not let them beat you down, and that usually entails kind of systematic cultivation of relationships with the officials, and you know, being pretty deliberate about that. And then sometimes it's like, darn it, there's an opportunity here. And the story of how Carrie and I met was kind of at the St. John the Baptist community meeting, where it's like, this is going to be so huge for this community if it knows about it fully. And they grasped that. And the first thing they did was they got their officials to reject the exemption. So in a way, there's already this kind of sense of, we did this together. Right now, it's in the early stages of this citizens committee being formed. And the idea is to form that kind of solid and then invite some key officials who aren't going to try to, you know, take it over, but enough to where it has a sort of authoritative standing. And this will be an interesting challenge because we don't know it as well as we do in other places. You know, it's been more of a almost a
affiliate group of Together Louisiana that's now trying to build something more permanent. So we'll probably make a bunch of mistakes in doing it, but we want to engage them in a way that makes sure that they don't try to take it over.
Great, thank you so much. We're running a little short on time, so I just wanted to give a friendly reminder that we've got some great messaging resources available on our Voices for Healthy Kids website, which I think most of you are pretty familiar with, but it's voicesforhealthykids.org. And now I'm going to transition it over to, we've got some more fun things in the chat box. We'll get to those. But I'm going to transition it over to Allison Frazier. Allison.
Thanks, Erica. Wow, I'm feeling really, really motivated after hearing about these campaigns and their amazing stories. Thank you to all of our presenters. I think if we have questions left in the chat box, we'll be sure to get answers out to everybody. We will be following up early next week with recordings and materials, so be on the lookout for that. But I really want to thank you so much for joining us at our first virtual summit. A special shout out to the presenters that we had on this call and throughout the day, but a special shout out to Annie Semitis, who really put on the monumental task of figuring out how to make this event virtual. Please, please, please fill out the evaluation forms that are sent to you. And I think we may have a slide with the link to it, but you certainly have been getting emails all day and will continue to get emails until you fill that out. So please do that for us. We use that to plan trainings as well as future summits, and we take each and every comment really seriously. And please mark your calendar for October 18th and through 20th of next year of 2021 for our hopefully in-person summit on the Santa Ana Pueblo in New Mexico. We'd love to see you all face-to-face there. And a big thanks again to all of our participants and to our presenters, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.